What is special about inventors? How do we search for and support creative people? And what does this have to do with skateboarding tricks, or silent drones, or self-driving ships, or solar panels in space, or shooting mosquitoes with lasers, and our future as a species? Welcome to Inner Cosmos with me, David Eagleman. I'm a neuroscientist and an author at Stanford, and in these episodes, we seek to understand why and how our lives look the way they do. And today's episode is about invention. I've always been fascinated by invention, not just new products and tech, but fresh ideas and new frameworks in science and ways of seeing the world that didn't exist before. The key thing about invention is that it requires more than just absorbing information. To invent, you have to recombine what you know in new ways, and you have to spot connections that others miss. And sometimes you need to ask, what if everything we assume is wrong? Now, the human capacity to do all this, to invent, is thanks largely to a part of the brain just behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex. We have more of this than any of our cousins in the animal kingdom. And this is the part of our brain that allows us to break away from the here and now and to imagine counterfactuals. In other words, things that don't exist but could. We can imagine those things and we can simulate out their consequences. And this is what allows us to step outside our current moment and picture alternative futures. As I mentioned in episode 72, I'm not certain that AI as we make it now can do that. It's great at piecing things together, but at least with the current architectures, it cannot say, you know what, I'm going to scrap everything that I've learned and think about this in a completely new way, because AI is not wired to reject what it has learned. But that kind of creative leap is something that humans do all the time, often unconsciously. It's what happens when a person cranks up the prefrontal cortex and looks at the world as it could be. Invention starts not just in the raw data, but it's the decision to look beyond that. So, without the neural architecture that allowed for massive human creativity, we would be doing the same thing that we did millions of years ago, just like every other species we're surrounded with. We wouldn't have electrification of the planet and the internet and commercial flight and space flight and desalination and vaccines and quantum computers and satellites and encryption techniques and self-driving cars and all the rest. And so today's conversation is about invention, how we can spot it and value it and fund it. And to this end, I'm pleased to welcome a friend of mine, Pablos Holman, who's on a mission to change the trajectory for inventors. He is a hacker and an inventor and a venture capitalist. And what I really appreciate about him is that in that latter role as a VC, he's not just chasing consumer software trends, but he hunts instead for hidden geniuses. He and his partner, Michael Reed, run a firm called Deep Future. And the people they back, as they describe it on their website, are, quote, mad scientists, rogue inventors, crazy hackers, and maverick entrepreneurs implementing science fiction, solving big problems, and helping our species become better ancestors. In other words, they're looking for the people who seek to do a lot more than the incremental improvement of the tools around us, but instead the people who leap into entirely new categories of possibility. So Pablos has just written a book called Deep Future, which comes out next week. And his take in the book is that invention is humanity's most important creative force, but it's also the one we've neglected the most. Inventors are often misunderstood and underfunded because there's often not a good system to support them. So even while we romanticize starving artists, we typically forget about starving inventors. His position is that we are missing out, and he always wants to position himself at the edge of what is possible. Here's our conversation.
So if you think about the creative classes of people you know, how many, musicians can you name?
Dozens.
Like at least
hundreds.
without even
Yeah.
right. Actors.
Dozens.
Painters.
Yep.
How about inventors that aren't dead?
Yeah. I can name about 5.
Maybe 5.
Yeah.
And probably none of them have a business card that says like inventor as their title.
Right.
Because it's not a legitimate career choice. And so there's this kind of weird gap in the world, I think, where, we celebrate our most creative people are people that are easy to identify. They're celebrities for, especially music artists and actors and stuff. But, you could probably live without, the next Marvel movie. You could probably live without the next Beyonce album. But if it wasn't for inventors, you wouldn't be alive at all.
Generally, that would include biologists making discoveries and so on.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Right. I think of scientific research as that's very important. That's critical. That's kind of the early stages of figuring out how the world works. That's the goal in basic research. And then in our world, we always need more for that, more resources, more money, more scientists, but we have a system for that. And then on the other end, you have a system for like entrepreneurs and making businesses and things like that. But those people are making businesses out of whatever they can invent. And they don't tend to be very creative. And this is why, all of our best businesses are like an app to have a stranger pick you up in their car. We're not honoring, I think, the creative class in the middle that is inventors. And we don't even recognize them as a creative class. Like it's crazy hair and a DeLorean in the garage. Like it's not even it's just people don't relate to it and understand. And it doesn't have the same maybe emotional connection that, a musician can evoke or a singer or something. But I think it's like kind of important to step back and recognize like, wow, this is our most important creative class. They don't have a place in society.
So let me step back to something you said.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you were thinking of when you said we wouldn't even be alive if it weren't for inventors. Give me an example of what you're talking about there.
You know who Edward Jenner is?
Yes, vaccine.
Edward Jenner made the first vaccine for smallpox. 400 million people died of smallpox in the last century, right? That's more people than I think we have in this country, maybe. Like it's a lot of people died of one disease, and regardless of what, I know people are wound up about vaccines these days, but at least in the case of smallpox, this is like one of the reasons you and I exist. Like we wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for that type of, and that's like a really interesting invention story where he figured out that these milkmaids who are milking cows contracted cowpox, which is not as life-threatening, not really as big of a deal disease, but then they never got smallpox.
Yeah.
And it's like this incredible insight, this amazing discovery. And like that guy figured out, I know how to go, I could go test that. And he did. And he figured out that we could now save people from dying of smallpox.
Two quick historical notes.
Sure.
That's, of course, where we get the name vaccine from cows, vaca.
Right.
But also, it turns out Edward Jenner was about the 8th person to invent the vaccine for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
In a way. Right. So there's also this, this kind of, lore that we have, I would say, that, inventors aren't actually that important. It was inevitable. Somebody was going to figure it out. So like, but there are lots of these cases where somebody didn't figure it out, or the person who figured it out didn't get the word out. I mean, this happened like with scurvy. Even you had all these people trying to cross oceans dying. You just load up a ship full of people expecting half of them to die of scurvy. And some of them might make it to the other side before we figured out all they need is oranges.
Yeah.
And like that was figured out and then like shelved for, I forgot, 75 years or something. But I think it is a way of diminishing the value of an inventor or an invention by saying, well, he just was able to do that because of the, people who came before them and standing on the shoulders of giants. And there's certainly a truth to that. Of course, we all start with what we, learned from our predecessors. But it still takes a creative mind to do something the first time.
In fact, so the basis of creativity is, your brain goes through the world and absorbs everything in your world and your culture, your moment in history.
Yeah.
And then what it's doing is remixing. It's bending, breaking, blending, putting these things together in new ways. And so you're exactly right. There's two ways you can look at creativity. One is, okay, well, it's just a remix based on the data that you happen to have. And so it was inevitable that it would come up. But you're exactly right that to be the inventor, the creator, is something really special because not everybody's doing it. Most people have all that data arrayed in front of them and don't care to get off their butts and do something about it.
Edward Jenner didn't invent the transistor or something. He had cows and milkmaids in front of him. So it makes sense that he would invent in that area. Yeah. But it still is this different, it's a completely different thing, I would contend. The second time you do it to the nth time you do it, that's a totally different, that's craft. You might be better at doing something than the inventor, but that's a completely different thing than figuring out what's possible the very first time.
Yeah. Okay. So there's something super special about inventors, and I know this is a big part of what you do and what you really care about is finding inventors who are making incredible things.
I want to find the inventors, and I want to figure out how we help them out, because it is kind of a lonely fate in a way. Most inventors are working in, relative isolation, and they might be obsessed and they might be going deep. And the people I know, a lot of them are, very focused on their thing. They don't even know how to get the story out. They wouldn't know how to make a company, how to raise money for it, how to get the help they need. I mean, it's a very tough thing. And also they're mostly doomed, because with an invention, you might get, even let's say you were a good inventor and you could have a good invention once a year. Well, what are you going to do with it? Like, how are you going to get paid for that? Where's it going to go? And most inventors fail to ever figure that stuff out in one lifetime.
Oof.
It's pretty sad. You think starving artists have a hard time. Starving inventors have an even worse time.
So give us some examples of some really cool inventions that you're seeing currently.
One comes to mind. A couple years ago, I went to visit this buddy of mine who is one of the top researchers on warp drive. So warp drive is like bending space-time to do faster than light travel. It's straight out of Star Trek. Nobody thinks we're ever really going to be able to do it, but these guys research it and try and no one's been able to prove that it can't be done. So I went to visit my buddy Sonny at his lab in Houston, and Sonny starts showing me around his lab. He's telling me about warp drive and UFOs and stuff. And then he's like, well, hey, there's a atomic force microscope in the back. You want to see it? So he's very excited to show me this because it's an exotic microscope, but I have one, so I don't care. On the way, so we're like walking over to back Sonny's lab, and he's like, he gets distracted. He picks up this little, circuit board. He's like, this is kind of neat. Sonny has like a southern drawl that I can't emulate, but he's most delightful, friendly human you'll ever find. So he shows me the circuit board, hooks up a couple of alligator clips to a meter, and there's a current coming off it. And all that's on the board is a chip. And I'm like, what is it, Sonny? He's like, we made that chip, and it puts out energy like a battery. I'm like, Sonny, you made a battery that never needs to be charged? He's like, yeah, where it just runs forever. You don't have to charge it. That's exactly right. I'm like, Sonny, what the hell are you doing with warp drive? We need that battery. And so that was a couple years ago, and we weren't, he started working on patents and kind of, making different versions of it to try and make it better. And then like a few weeks ago, he called me and said, hey, Pablos, I just did the interview on the Joe Rogan show. And I'm like, Sonny, I thought we were keeping this quiet because there's work to do. And so it was in stealth mode for years. And he said, well, I decided to go for it. And so I listened to the show, and this is the biggest podcast in the world. And so, for 2 hours, Sonny's talking about warp drive and UFOs and aliens and all the stuff that Joe Rogan likes. And then he's like, oh, Joe, I made this thing. Look at this. And he explains it to Joe. I think it went right over Joe. I don't think he realized a miracle was announced on his podcast because Sonny buried the lead so deep. So these are, he just doesn't have the kind of brain that's like about getting the story out, what would you do with a battery that never needs to be charged?
As in, how would one start a company and make it? Yeah,
if you're, this is a scientist. So, all those other pieces have to be figured out, and we try to help people like that out.
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
but that would change the world, right?
Oh, yeah, agreed. I spent the first part of my career running a lab as a professor, and I ran a lab, and I spent half my time writing grants to the government and so on. And then about 10 years ago, I shifted into being an entrepreneur, and I moved out to Silicon Valley, and I've been starting companies.
Yeah.
And it is a very different skill set.
Oh, for sure.
In terms of taking a good idea and turning it into something. Yeah.
Yeah, most people wouldn't be good at both. So I think one of the things our mythology in Silicon Valley is a little screwed up. We think that like a scientist is going to invent something and then become an entrepreneur and then become a patent lawyer and then become a business development guy and sell it and then become a CEO and figure out the HR policy. Like those people are extraordinary and rare. That doesn't scale. Like the winning story is actually teams. And so I think one of the things we have to learn very early is figure out how do you build these teams early, compensate for the things that the founder who might be a scientist or an inventor might suck at, and surround them with all the other things that we figured out how to do well. Yeah.
So returning to the issue of creativity, so you began your career as a hacker,
right?
Yeah. So tell us about that.
I sort of grew up with one of the first computers you could have at home.
Which was that?
This Apple II. Okay. I had one of the first couple thousand Apple IIs ever made. And with that thing, it wasn't like a computer we know today. Like it's just you boot it up, there's a command line, and you got to figure out what to do. And I was in Alaska, where I grew up. So nobody for like 1,000 miles had any idea what a computer was. And so no one had seen one, So to learn how to use that thing, I basically just had to crash it and reboot it. And it was kind of like a Jeep. You could sort of, made of sheet metal, you could sort of, take it apart. You could open up and see the inside and stare at it. And if you stare at it long enough, you can kind of figure out how it works. So I sort of learned the hard way. And that's not common now because your computer hides all the insides. It's not like a Jeep. It's like a Tesla or something with the hood welded shut. You can't see how it works. And so, by the time I, got, say, out of high school or something, I was, I knew a lot about computers relative to the rest of the world. And so then we started putting people on the internet, not nerds, but muggles, And so
what are muggles?
Muggles is like a term co-opted from Harry Potter to describe what you might call NPCs, or, just normal people wandering around. We put these people who are not wizards on the internet, and they cause problems, or they're vulnerable to problems, let's say. And so we try to figure out how to make things more secure. But the way that you do that is by breaking them first. And so what's amazing about hackers is they just have these different kinds of minds. Like we all learn by reverse engineering. We learn by taking things apart. So like if you get a new gadget and give it to your mom, she might ask you, what does this do? And you can explain, it's a phone, Mom, iPhone, says on the box. But if you give a gadget like that to a hacker, then the question is different. The question is, what can I make this do? And hackers will flip it over and take out all the screws and break it into a lot of little pieces, but then figure out what you can build from the rubble. And that's that discovery process. That's where you get all of your new technologies. Nobody ever invented a new technology by reading the directions. Right? There are none. It's a logical impossibility. And so those kinds of minds, the people who think that way, are super valuable. We need them. And you might not want to hire them, but one way or another, we need to party with them and have a relationship with the people who are the source of all of our new superpowers.
So let me do an analogy here, because I've been thinking about this a lot, about whether large language models, the current common flavor of our AI, can do scientific discovery. And the reason they're not any good at the moment of real new scientific discovery is because what they are good at doing is taking everything that's come before for them and putting it together in different ways. And that's got value in a lot of aspects. But what it doesn't have value in is saying, hey, what if all this is wrong and there's a totally new way to do this? It's the equivalent of taking the thing apart and saying, what can I do that wasn't thought of before with these pieces and parts? And a big part of really making scientific progress is to assume that some fraction of everything you've learned, all the models you've learned before you, is incorrect, some fraction, and there's a different way of doing the whole thing. And so there's an analogy, a parallel here between what a scientific discoverer does and an inventor and a hacker.
Yeah, it gives me pause thinking about this problem because you can fake a lot with a random number generator. So if you look at what an LLM is doing now and you ask it the same question every day for a week, it's going to give you slight variations of the same answer. And that's because by design, they have thrown in a random number generator just to make it, feel like it's, more of human, because humans would kind of give you a slightly different answer every day too. And there might be a version of this where you throw enough computation at something and you just say, look, just try everything. And certainly in a focused domain, you can do that. And we do that. That's what we're doing with drug discovery and molecules and protein folding and stuff. And you can't try every possible way a protein can fold without it being very computationally expensive. But, we add in some heuristics to say, well, probably it's this, and here's a bunch of other ones. So maybe copy those and try one variation at a time. And we just run every possibility. And so there is a kind of discovery that I think is possible there. I don't know what the bounds on it are. And so I don't want to say like computational models will never do scientific discovery or invention. We might be able to make models that do that. I don't think the LLMs as we know them are the right kind of model to do that right now because they are so heavily trained on just what humans did.
What they do is they interpolate. They don't extrapolate. They don't say, hey, what if all this that I learned, that I digested is incorrect and there's a different way of looking at it. And then here's a new idea and I'm going to simulate that forward and think about, that would explain the data in a better way. Yeah. They're just not architected to do that.
I had in the book, I have a story about one of my friends who I think of as one of the best living inventors. But his name is Rodney Mullen. And Rodney...
The skateboard champion?
Is the skateboarder.
Yeah.
And he's famous for skateboarding because he invented almost everything you've ever seen a kid do on a skateboard.
That's right.
Rodney grew up in rural Florida, kind of like I grew up in rural Alaska, no computer, just took Apple II. He was in rural Florida. He didn't get an Apple II, he got a skateboard. And so Rodney was stuck by himself at a time when there was no one around him who skateboarded. He didn't ever see anybody else do tricks on a skateboard. He had nothing, no one to inspire him. He just had to figure all this shit out himself in his driveway by himself. And so he became the most prolific inventor of things you could do on a skateboard. And you could say skateboarding isn't important, but kind of like country music or something, like a lot of people are actually quite inspired about skateboarding. And so Rodney is an inspiration to them. But what's amazing is Rodney will have an idea for a thing that's never been done on a skateboard. He'll spend a year just trying to make it work. He'll get it. YouTube video goes up. 2 weeks later, kids in Kazakhstan are doing it better than him.
Yeah.
That's the moment of creation. The word creativity, you create something. The world didn't have it before. You created something. And even if it's just a skateboard trick, that's creativity. And you could see it in Jimi Hendrix. You could see it in, I don't know, like Jonas Salk. You could see it in these people. And I think that we need to find a way to have a better, more mature relationship with that, celebrate that, search for these people, support them, help them. I mean, what happened to, we used to have patrons for artists.
Oh yeah.
Let's just send Doc Brown $10 a month on Patreon. I guess that's what Patreon's for. Are there inventors on Patreon? That seems like something we should try. Anyway.
No, that's a really good point, because one can write grants off to the government and so on, but there are a very limited number of people looking for inventors to fund them. Yeah.
Yeah. And you could, it's not a binary thing. I mean, there's obviously a lot of invention at the borders of science. There's obviously a lot of invention in engineering and products and companies and stuff. A lot of that is, very, very iterative, and it is important. If you're at Hewlett-Packard, you're probably going to figure out how to make like a better inkjet printer that's like 1% better every year. And that's really important and cool. And that's how we got to where we are. But where's the guy who's inventing what comes after inkjet? He's not Hewlett-Packard. But you get the idea, right? There's something better out there. And so, we've been fortunate to be attracting some of these inventors and, guys like Sonny.
Oh, that's great. One of the things that has always fascinated me is the spread of invention. So Rodney Mullen comes up with some new skateboarding technique. The kids in Kazakhstan are doing it 2 weeks later because of one thing, the internet.
Yeah.
The internet, I think, is the most important invention we've ever had as a species,
right,
in large part because it allows the instant and global dissemination of information.
Yep.
The reason that Edward Jenner was the 8th person to invent vaccination. This was invented in India. It was invented in Africa. It had been invented in different places, but there was no way to disseminate the information. That's why it had to be reinvented. The way I picture this is like the globe, and there's some fire that starts where people know this thing, and then the fire dies out because there's no way to keep that information.
A lot of historical examples of that. I think Edward Jenner's actual innovation was that he had a way, which the others didn't. He had a way of testing and proving the correlation and making it repeatable, which other people had used smallpox to vaccinate against smallpox, which was very dangerous. He's the one who figured out how to use cowpox to vaccinate against smallpox. But anyway.
He was also growing up in a culture in England where there was a Royal Academy and people wrote down things and they got presentations on these things, and then they made sure that other people...
And the output of that was staggering, partly because so much was available to discover at the time. But if you look at what's the scale of the Royal Academy, I mean, it was probably like a few hundred people involved over the course of, decades. It's not actually like we have, I don't know, you could have like a soccer team that had more people involved in a high school, like it's just so, yeah, I mean, great time to be alive, I think, as far as scientific discovery, because, nobody had written anything down before you. But now we have the compound interest of the internet, the way you describe.
Yeah, exactly. And we have the compound interest of all the inventions that have come before. Yes. So now invention is going faster than ever.
Right.
Also, you have so much more of the planet getting an education than ever before. So instead of 100 guys sitting around, now you have boys and girls all over the world working on things and watching YouTube video and putting that together with this and that and putting things together and inventing.
And what's wild about it is, the things I'm talking about, these inventions, you typically don't see them in iPhone apps.
Yeah.
If you look at the world we live in, we think we have this huge tech industry that's supposed to be bringing these inventions to life. But what are they doing? They're bringing you iPhone apps. They're software. We don't have a tech industry. We have a software industry. And so we live in this world where even though we've accelerated on scientific research and discovery, we've accelerated on invention in spite of my complaints about the lack of support. But what we really did is we indexed on entrepreneurs and we support them, we fund them, we celebrate them. Like, whose YouTube video gets all the views? The guy who made the most money, right? It's not the guy who made the biggest difference. And so there's this weird situation where our big tech industry that's supposed to be helping us bring these inventions to life is distracted. They're making, Zoom and Slack and Snapchat, and those things might be amazing, but what technology did Airbnb invent? What new superpower did Instagram bring to the world? It's an app for sharing photos instead of like text and photos. Amazing. So I think there's this we're in this moment now where a lot of the easy shit's been done. Like everything, we had to reinvent everything as a website and then reinvent it as a mobile app. Now we have to reinvent it as AI, but basically it's just apply software to everything. But when you look at the big problems in the world, food, water, waste, sanitation, construction, energy, and manufacturing, those are not things you're going to improve with software. I mean, you could improve them a little bit, 1 or 2%. You're not going to reinvent them. You're going to make them 10 times better with software. Mining, these are things that require real inventions, real technologies that could make the world massively better. And you're going to get that from the creative people who invent those 10x or 100x multipliers.
So that's what you look for. You look for those.
We call that deep tech.
Deep tech. You look for that. And so give us some other examples of things you found.
So like in mining, that's one where, in the US, we basically outlawed mining because we want to save the world. And mining involves a lot of nasty emissions. You basically take a bunch of rock and burn it and hope you get some metal. And then you just create insane emissions. So that's in a smelter. Well, we outlawed smelters. So now we take the rock that we mine and we ship it to other countries and they run it through a smelter and to get the metal out and then send it back to us. So we haven't exactly solved a problem, but we definitely got it out of our backyard. So March 19th, I found this little team that invented a way of doing zero emissions refining for metals like copper. We need copper for everything, but we don't mine it here, and because we're not allowed to. And so this team can refine copper kind of the way we refine aluminum. It's mostly electricity, so you could power that with a solar farm or something clean. And so that was on March 19th, and then on March 20th, the president signed an executive order to free up mining in this country, which is very important because we have all the metals you could need for hundreds of years in this country. All those rare earth metals, what are we doing? We're engaged in geopolitical machinations to get them from Ukraine or China or places that really don't want to give them to us. Instead, we could just mine them here. And I think it's a very important example because like on something like that, we should be setting an example for the rest of the world. If we're the country that's good at doing new things, and we are, then we should figure out, okay, smelters suck. What's the best way to refine metal? We're going to prototype that. We're going to build that. We're going to deploy it first. We're going to show that it's actually 5 times cheaper to build, 10 times cheaper to operate. And then the rest of the world can copy that instead of copying what we did a century ago. So we need to set an example on these things that if we want to have a big impact on saving the world. And I think that's what's possible with a lot of these technologies.
Excellent. Yeah. How does that actually work, though? Give us this deeper sense.
It's called molten sulfide electrolysis. And so if you look at just to keep it simple, aluminum, for example, is mostly made of electricity. Your pop cans is metal, but it's mostly electricity is what is involved in making aluminum. And with a smelter, you just burn coal or you burn gas to get a lot of heat to essentially melt or burn rock. That's how a smelter works. So with the electrolysis, what's happening is using an electrochemical process to separate the metals from the rock. And you can get much better yields this way now.
Great.
So yeah, it's the early stages. So we have things like that. We have a nuclear reactor. That's one of our teams invented a nuclear reactor. I found these inventors that figured out they could make a nuclear reactor that will fit through a manhole. And it just uses all existing technology, no crazy new, Gen 4 reactor technology, just regular reactor, but it's this big around, and they bury it a mile deep in a borehole. So the thing is unquestionably safe. There's 10 billion tons of rock between the reactor and anyone's backyard. Nothing could go wrong, but if it did, there'd be no radioactivity at the surface. Just fill the hole with dirt and forget about it. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can make them in a factory like Toyotas. We can make thousands of them. All of our reactors that we have in this country are like bespoke art projects. They're like Frank Gehry buildings. They build one of one.
Yeah.
And these things, don't, like anything else, the first one is always expensive. So we did 92 number 1 reactors. None of them have any interchangeable parts. They all have their own engineering team. It's crazy. So let's build them in a factory like the Toyotas. They're not even more complicated than a Toyota. They're not bigger than a Toyota. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff that's possible.
Oh, that's a good one. What else? What else?
Oh man, we got a team taking. So the problem with like solar panels, we have solar farms we've been building, but they suck for two big reasons: clouds and nighttime. So the relentless onslaught of night has been screwing with our solar panels. We have no idea what to do about it. But I got this team that figured out they can take the solar farm and just put it on a rocket and launch it into space.
Oh.
So a solar farm in space will get sun 24 hours a day. It looks like nighttime because we just have a bad angle on it. Space is actually noon all the time. So a solar farm in space will get sun 24 hours a day, all year long. And then it can beam the energy down to Earth using radio waves that go right through clouds. And it sounds crazy. I know it sounds like science fiction, but we have all the tech to do this. It's not even that hard. The only real problem was launch cost. And launch cost, like in a space shuttle, it would have cost $40,000 to put your iPad in space. Now, thanks to SpaceX, it's down to $1,500.
Great.
Their target for Starship is $10.
$10.
Yeah, it'll be cheaper to store your old sports ball equipment in space than your garage before the end of the decade. Like, that's where we're at. I know it sounds crazy, but that's why something like space solar is possible.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
What fraction of our energy do you think we'll get from space solar in a decade from now?
So it's one of these things where you get economies of scale very quickly. So, solar panels, we've already scaled up manufacturing those. That's very cheap. They're light, they're flat. You can put a lot of them in a Starship. I think we could get something like 150 megawatts out of a single Starship launch. So imagine, do that a couple times a week, and every one you put up pays for itself immediately, serving the biggest market on Earth. You beam power to the poles or to the middle of Africa. You don't need storage. You don't need transmission lines. And it's just clean energy that goes everywhere.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It is, yeah. And so I want to do terawatts, but yeah, it'll take a while to launch enough panels to do that. But it's called space for a reason. Like, there's totally room for huge solar farms in space.
And give us another example.
So one I love that is actually not even that high tech, but is just genius, is I got this team that is making cargo ships that sail themselves. So no crew, no fuel, no emissions. It's not even that high tech. You duct tape a Tesla to the front of the ship and it drives itself across the ocean. There's nothing to hit out there. It's easier than self-driving cars. And then there's like one documented pedestrian in all of human history. So we're just going to make that. And the sailing part has been working for centuries. That's how people got to this country in the first place. But now to get Happy Meal toys from China to Los Angeles, we're burning this nasty bunker oil. People don't realize it, but cargo ships have two gas tanks. One is burning refined fuel, like your car, that it doesn't burn clean, but it burns invisibly. And then the other, as soon as they get over the horizon, out of sight, they switch to burning bunker oil, which is the cheapest crap you can get. It's basically optimized for carbon emissions, and it's just black smoke. You never see it because they don't do it until they're out of sight. Yeah, so that's an industry where...
Wait, but how does self-navigating solve that problem?
Well, because it's kind of two classes of issues. One is you don't need fuel because of the sailing.
Oh, it's sailing. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. There's no fuel cost. We don't burn anything. $5 out of $6 in the shipping industry is burned as fuel. We just do the self-sailing with the automation because we can. I mean, you could put a guy in there steering it if you want, but you don't need him.
I see. But let me just make sure I got this straight.
Yeah.
So you didn't literally mean a Tesla on the...
I'm not literally.
No, okay,
but we have self-driving tech that's good enough that you could put it on a ship.
Got it. So let me understand. So you've got a ship, a sailboat,
a ship
large
with sails, cargo ship with sails.
Okay, and it self-navigates and burns no fuel that way. And can I assume that it's taking wind data from a much larger area than it would normally have access to?
We're really good at that now.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And it has batteries for backup. And to get out of it. And you need dead zones because you don't want to get stuck in the middle of the ocean for a week. And it has batteries for docking, so you do that with electric. But mostly it's sailing. And that's like a really smart thing to do with wind power. It's right where you need it. It's mechanical energy, which is what you need. That's something that could make a huge difference. It's a huge amount of CO2 emissions gone. It's a huge amount of expense gone.
Yeah.
If you look up the ships on the ocean right now, half of them are just moving fuel around. Half of the ships on the ocean are moving gas and oil around. That's all they're doing.
Gosh.
It's insanity. And we could do so much better. Yeah.
Give us another one. What's another company?
So here's one that we just announced today. No one has ever heard about this. So if you are in an airplane, a jet, you burn the gas, it expands really fast, creates, there's a lot of heat, but it's mainly the expansion goes into what's called a turbofan, which is a jet engine to make thrust to push the plane. Okay, you got that. So for a long time, people have been trying to figure out is there a way to make thrust just from electricity? And there have been different ideas for this, different names for it. One of my favorite names is electrogravitics. That was one of the early names. And then now, like MIT worked on it a little while ago, they called it ionic wind. And so the idea is you're basically making a kind of an electrostatic generator to charge ions to get them moving, and then get enough of them moving that you're moving air. And people have done this, but you can only get just like a faint amount of. They could barely get a paper airplane to fly this way, but the phenomenon wasn't well understood. Nobody was really sure how it was working, and so they weren't able to optimize it to make it work well. Well, I got this team that figured it out, and so now they've made a drone they have already working that can fly. It has no moving parts. It's all electric. It's completely silent. And it just flies. Their breakthrough is they've figured out how to accelerate the air going through it. Everybody else was only able to get it, like every time they made a stage to accelerate the air, they had to make that stage like bigger and bigger and bigger. So we've solved that. So now we can make multiple stages. We can get that thrust going, boom. So silent, all electric. Drones are all electric anyway, but silent drones with no moving parts, and eventually airplanes, same thing. They're getting thrust. They haven't the early stages, so they have to build more prototypes. But basically, they're able to do thrust that's equivalent to a turbofan, like a jet. They'll get there,
and it'll be totally silent.
Yeah, have a silent airplane.
Oh my God! What's the name of this company?
That's called Dalian.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And literally, this is the very first time I've ever talked about it because
you just announced this morning.
They just got their patent today and told me, and so I just put it on our website today.
Oh, amazing!
First time ever.
Yeah. So here's a personal question. So you're really interested in all these inventions and so on. So what got you onto the business side of this as opposed to being an inventor yourself?
Well, I got to do a lot of the things that these people need to do. The inventors and the entrepreneurs. I got to invent a lot of things, got to start a lot of companies. I got to, go through the experience of having them be decimated. I've gotten to, raise money for them. I've had to hire people and fire people. I had to do all those things. And then for an inventor, like one of the things I went through was this, you always are trying to get access to tools. You're always trying to figure out, like, where do I get the tools to try this idea and get the money and stuff? And then eventually, I started the Intellectual Ventures Lab with Nathan Myhrvold, and one of the things we did is we just bought one of every tool in the world. And so then I kind of got it out of my system. And then we worked on every kind of invention project. We got 6,000 patents on our own inventions there. So it was a very large-scale invention operation. But because I had every tool, I could build a prototype, anything I wanted. And I pretty quickly learned that, like, there's always somebody better than me at operating the tool. And so, like, I want to understand them and what they can do and how to do it. But I always learned somebody's better than me at this, so let's get them on the job. And so once that kind of changed my working mode to where, like, I did almost everything via email. Just like, can you build this? Can you print this? Can you design that? And then I think, so that's a pretty weird experience. Like I kind of just got it out of my system. Okay. If I wanted to invent anything, I got to do it already. And then you also, like we built a big team of inventors and we turned invention into kind of a team sport. And now what I do is I try to help other inventors because they have better inventions than me anyway at this point. And so find them.
So tell us more about invention as a team sport.
Yeah, that was one of the really great things we got to do at that lab. So, Nathan had built Microsoft Research before. He was CTO at Microsoft back in their heyday. And, at Microsoft Research, he hired a lot of smart people and met all the other smart people that he couldn't hire. So when we started the lab, he was able to just round up a lot of the, really prolific inventors, polymaths, people who, had a high probability of being useful in invention. And then what we did is we'd have these like invention sessions where we'd find somebody with a problem and sit them down, surround them with a nuclear physicist, a laser expert, a chemist, computer hacker. Collectively, we know the cutting edge in every area in science and technology. Between us, we're probably reading every paper that comes out or, something like that. So learning about every new algorithm, every new sensor, every new chip, things that could help you with the output of research, the output of science. And we would just take that and kind of ask ourselves, well, does this change anything humans have ever done? Can we do it faster, cheaper, better, maybe in a more humane fashion? Those are the kinds of questions we'd be asking. There's like a Rubik's Cube in your brain, just matching up problems to the technologies. And so that's invention. And in the invention sessions, the person with the problem is very important because we would invent stuff no matter what. Lots of useless stuff. But if the other person with a problem to kind of focus everybody, then what you would do is, find inventions at the borders. A lot of times the invention, like our most famous invention is a machine that can find mosquitoes and shoot them down with laser beams. And people love it because everyone hates mosquitoes. And so we did it as like we had actually in that case, Bill Gates was the guy with the problem because he brought us malaria to work on. So we're trying to find malaria interventions, and the malaria is spread by the mosquitoes. So we thought, okay, well, we were just joking around because you always try lasers first because like lasers are cool. So every invention starts with lasers, and if that doesn't work, then you try something else. But here we can use lasers, awesome. And so then what happened is we were just joking about it, but one of the inventors in the room, Lowell Wood, he's actually has more patents than Thomas Edison. He's the record for in America for patents. Wow. Lowell, prolific inventor, but Lowell had worked on Star Wars for Reagan, and the idea with that was to have giant lasers in space that would shoot down missiles. Right. So these missiles you see on YouTube right now, we could actually, at least the intercontinental ones, you could shoot them down with a laser. And that sounds crazy, but we spent like $50 billion on this back in the 80s. And Lowell said, we already proved this would work. And the mosquito is a bigger, easier target in this context than a missile would be from space, right? Because the missiles are much further and you need a bigger laser. Here we have a smaller laser, but the mosquitoes are only 100 meters away or less. And so anyway, even an invention like that, you had to have like people kind of on the border of machine vision, because this is 15 years ago now, but at the time it's like, well, using motion detection algorithms, could we find the mosquito in real time and aim a laser in real time? And we had the right people for lasers and machine vision. So you could come up with inventions that often were at the borders of different areas in science and technology that way. This process, I contend, is totally repeatable. Like other organizations could do it. Other people could do it. We cheated by getting the smartest people we could find, but get the smartest people you can find and try it. Like that's totally possible.
And what were the things that worked when you've got the nuclear physicist and the computer hacker and everyone in the room? How do you do the interaction so that everyone's not flipping their own Rubik's Cube, but they're flipping a community Rubik's Cube?
So our first rule, a lot of people in brainstorming mode would say there's no bad ideas. Let's get them all out there. Ours was a little different. Ours was, there are definitely bad ideas. And if you think my idea is bad, you should totally shoot it down, but you got to come up with one that's better. So it was, and look, this doesn't work for everybody. When you're in a context like that, your North Star is what's technically true. So feelings don't matter. It's about what's true. And we're all trying to find the truth. So if I say something that sounds like bullshit and you think, no, you're full of shit, you could tell me I'm full of shit, but then tell me like what's actually true. Do you have better data or newer data, or is there some reason why you think that? Or do you know something I don't know? All that's totally fine. So nobody takes it personally. That's very honest intellectual discourse, and I love that. I mean, I think most people don't understand what that would be like, but when you're able to be collaborating with people where you don't have to sugarcoat things, worry about their feelings, dumb things down, simplify things, any of that, it's just we're trying to find what's true, then it takes the personal aspect out of it. I have to shout down Bill Gates sometimes,
Yeah.
and so, it doesn't work for sycophants or people who are, worried about what people think of them.
Right. So how would you see replicating this more widely, getting this sort of thing set up? Could you implement this in schools? You have invention clubs where people sit around and take on problems and do that?
I would love that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we were very fortunate in that we had the mindset to do that, the will to do it, the resources to do it. Bill Gates funded a lot of our humanitarian projects, all the stuff with malaria and disease eradication, and other things as well, and energy and different things. So we're lucky to have that kind of support. What I've found is most of the time, the incentive structure in other organizations doesn't lend itself to invention. And here's why. I can actually explain that too. If you are a successful institution of any type, that could be a business or a university or just the healthcare system or a government, part of what happens is as it evolves and is successful, it evolves an immune system. And the immune system's job is to suppress risk. And what looks like risk is change. And so this is one of the big reasons why you don't see innovation in bigger, older, more successful institutions of any kind. It's because anything that looks like change, we have a system to squash it or keep it out or slow it down, whatever. And so that's why like Silicon Valley is thousands of million-dollar experiments. That's what startups are. And that's why we're cool with them dying, right? We're really cool with them dying fast. We'd much rather kill these things fast. So a startup's job is to try out really a new idea, hopefully a new invention. If you're working on a cool startup, there's a new invention. The new invention or a new idea or a new product, we want to find out real quick if we can make this successful. And we're going to be competing against all the other people who are trying to make something else successful, and we want to find those winners. And then once we find the winners, Silicon Valley got real good at just pouring fuel on the fire. And you can see that. And it just seems crazy to everyone else in the world. But when we find a winner, then we try to take it global as fast as we can and win the value out of it so we can make enough money to go fund a bunch more things that aren't going to work.
That was my interview with Pablos Holman, and that gives us a glimpse into the frontier of deep tech and the people who are building it, and one investor who's made it his mission to support them. Every time I speak with someone like Pablos, I walk away feeling that the future is closer than we think, and also with a sense of how easy it is to miss it, because invention doesn't announce itself in pitch decks or quarterly reports. Sometimes it looks like a piece of circuit board in a back lab. And unless people are really listening, ideas can go unnoticed, just like the way that inoculation was invented over and over again before it took root. So one lesson from today is that inventing is not the same as running a business or engineering or scaling. Invention is the rare act of using the prefrontal cortex to imagine a world that didn't exist 5 minutes ago, and then bending reality to bring that into being. We also learned that this kind of thinking doesn't usually emerge inside institutions that are optimized for predictability and control. As Pablos put it, institutions develop immune systems against change, against risk, against anything that smells like uncertainty, which unfortunately includes just about every great idea in its early days. That's why so many of the stories we heard today have a similar theme: breakthroughs buried in obscurity. A silent electric propulsion system, a nuclear reactor the size of a trash can, a self-sailing cargo ship, a space-based solar farm, a battery that might never need charging. A lot of inventions like this exist, but they have to wait for attention and belief and funding. And we're probably not going to solve our global scale problems like energy and water and food and climate and transportation with branding or software tweaks. We're going to solve them with hard technology and with brave experiments. And that means we need to get better at finding and funding and supporting inventors, not just business types. And that probably means we're going to need to change the culture a little bit. It would be great to teach kids that inventor is a real job title. We need to create more spaces where creative risk-taking is safe and even celebrated. We need to stop culturally pretending that invention is just science in a lab or engineering in a workshop, because invention is curiosity, and it's often a mess, but it's also the source of almost everything that we value. And this is our moment to make cultural change, because there are more people with ideas today than at any other point in human history. So I'll leave you with this challenge: be an inventor, big or small, because invention is for anyone who's willing to ask, what if? Or just be a supporter or encourager of the inventors around you. The future never comes from more of the same. It comes from the minds that take advantage of these incredible inherited neural networks to look at the world not as it is, but as it could be. Go to eagleman.com/podcast for more information and to find further reading. Join the weekly discussions on my Substack, and check out and subscribe to Inner Cosmos on YouTube for videos of each episode and to leave comments. Until next time, I'm David Eagleman, and this is Inner Cosmos.